The brass key was cold in my palm, and I remember gripping it so hard the teeth left a mark in my skin. Downstairs, I could hear boxes scraping across my hardwood floor. Someone laughed. A low, satisfied laugh, the kind people make when they think they've already won. I stood at the top of my own staircase in my own. That was the moment, the exact second my stomach dropped because his sentence had a rhythm to it. It was rehearsed too. They had talked about this, planned it, practiced the wording. In my house. About my house. I looked at my mother. How long have you two been discussing this without me? She waved her hand like she was swatting a fly. Does it matter? Family helps family. I didn't argue that night. I said I needed to think about it. I cleared the table. I hugged them both goodbye at the door the way I always did. But when I went upstairs to my bedroom afterward, I noticed something small. My spare key hook by the coat closet, the one with my one and only spare house key, was empty. I hadn't touched that hook in months. 2 days later, sorting through mail on my kitchen counter, I found a receipt that wasn't mine, wedged between a stack of takeout menus, dropped I assume by Colin during dinner. A locksmith invoice. Dated 11 days before the dinner. One key duplicated. Address? Blackwell Street. Mine. 11 days. They'd made a copy of my key 11 days before my mother stood up and asked. I called my mother, keeping my voice light, curious, non-confrontational. Hey, did you happen to have a spare key made for the house? I found a receipt. She didn't even pause. Oh, that. I had one cut for emergencies. You're always at job sites, Dana, and I worry. Plausible. Motherly, even. I said, that makes sense, thank you for thinking of me. And hung up. I didn't believe a word of it. A week later, I was searching through an old filing box in my home office for a warranty on my water heater when I found a manila folder that didn't belong to me, tucked behind my tax files. Inside was a single typed page, titled Family Property Access Addendum, referencing my late father's estate, an estate that had been closed and finalized 4 years earlier, and stating that in the spirit of the decedent's wishes, the Blackwell Street property should be considered accessible to all surviving children for residential need. At the bottom, a notary stamp. Except the notary's registration number, when I looked it up online that night, belonged to a woman in Charlotte who had retired in 2019. It was forged. Someone had built a fake legal-sounding document to make Colin's claim to my house look like it had paperwork behind it. In case I asked questions. In case I needed to be shown, not just told. I sat at my kitchen table at 11 at night with that fake document in front of me, and I felt something in my chest go very still and very cold. I confronted Colin directly 2 days later, over coffee at a diner neutral ground, recorded quietly on my phone in my jacket pocket, because by then I'd stopped trusting either of them in private. I slid the folder across the table. What is this? He barely flinched. He leaned back, laced his fingers behind his head, and said, and I want you to really hear this. Look, it's not like a legal document. It's more of a good faith memorandum reflecting equitable interest based on informal family understanding. Dad always said the house was for the kids. Mom just formalized the intent. Equitable interest. Informal family understanding. My brother, who had failed 3 separate businesses, a food truck, a consulting firm, and something called a Web3 logistics platform that raised $40,000 from our elderly aunt and delivered nothing, was suddenly speaking like a paralegal. I said calmly, okay, thank you for explaining. I paid for the coffee. I smiled. I let him think I'd bought it. The following weekend, I stopped by my mother's house to drop off groceries, and I heard them before I saw them, through the screen door in the kitchen, laughing. She actually said, thank you for explaining, Colin said, doing an exaggerated, breathy imitation of my voice. God, she's so easy. Just tell her something with big words and she nods along like a golden retriever. My mother laughed. She's always been like that. Give her a spreadsheet and she's happy. Give her a real problem and she folds. She won't even notice when I move the rest of my stuff in, Colin said. By the time she figures out what's happening, I'll already be in the leaseholder position. Squatters' rights kick in eventually, right? That's a real thing. I stood very still on the porch, holding a bag of groceries, and I did not walk in. I turned around, drove home, and sat in my driveway for 11 minutes before I could make my hand stop shaking enough to text my attorney. The worst discovery came 10 days later, and it came by accident. I got a call from my business bank Fifth Third, flagging unusual activity. Not on my business account but referencing my EIN, my company's federal tax ID. Someone had used Whitfield & Co.'s business information to open a $47,000 line of credit at a subprime lender specializing in equipment financing. The application listed Colin Whitfield as authorized signer, operations manager. I have never once employed my brother. I pulled the application. His forged signature was on it. My digital signature, copied badly, pixelated at the edges from being lifted off an old invoice PDF I'd emailed him 2 years earlier when I'd briefly hired him to haul debris, was on it too. $47,000. In my company's name. Sitting there, already drawn down to $31,000 spent, I'd later learn, on a leased Range Rover, for months of hotel stays, and a business trip to Miami that was, according to his own Instagram, entirely poolside. That was the moment this stopped being about a bedroom. That was the moment it became a crime. I want to be honest about the decision I made next because it was deliberate, and it was cold, and I don't regret a second of it. I decided to become exactly what they already believed me to be. I started slouching a little more at dinner. I let my voice go soft and tired when Colin brought up the room situation. I stopped correcting my mother when she talked over me. I bought a cheap reading pair of glasses I didn't need and wore them low on my nose because I'd noticed people underestimate a woman fumbling with her glasses. I let my hand shake just slightly when I signed for a package because I'd noticed that tremor reads as weakness and weakness reads as safe. Internally, I was doing none of that. I had already hired a real estate attorney, Priya Anand, and a forensic accountant to trace the $47,000. I had already filed a police report for identity theft with the Buncombe County Sheriff's Office, quietly, on a Tuesday morning before work, telling no one. But to my family, I performed defeat. I guess it's fine if Colin stays for a bit. I told my mother on the phone, letting my voice crack in exactly the right place. I just don't want to fight about it anymore. I'm tired. I could hear the smile in her silence. That's my girl. See, this didn't need to be complicated. Inside I thought, you have no idea how complicated I'm about to make this. The tactic was simple. People who believe they've already won stop covering their tracks. People who think you're too weak, too tired, too golden retriever nodding to notice they get sloppy. And sloppy people leave evidence. I needed them sloppy. So I gave them exactly the version of me they wanted. I set 3 baits. The first, I accidentally left a document on my kitchen counter. A real one this time. A preliminary refinance application from my bank, showing I was considering pulling equity out of the house for a business expansion. I wanted Colin to see it and panic, to talk about it with my mother, to say something incriminating about their long-term plan for the property. The second, I installed a single small camera disguised as a smoke detector in the hallway outside the guest suite, legal in North Carolina for a homeowner recording common areas of their own home. My attorney confirmed, as long as it wasn't in a bathroom or bedroom with a reasonable expectation of privacy. I aimed it at the hallway and the front closet, where the key hook was. The third, I told my mother in a soft, defeated voice that I was thinking about having a small welcome home dinner for Colin the following Friday, extended family invited, the whole performance, to make it official, to stop fighting about it. I said it like a surrender. It was a stage. I was building a stage. For 6 days I watched. My phone buzzed quietly in my blazer pocket during job site walkthroughs, camera alerts. I ducked behind a stud wall and checked the footage between client calls. Tuesday, Colin on the phone in the hallway laughing. She's basically letting me have the room now, bro. I'm thinking I sublease the basement storage space too. Put a bed down there. Rent it out on Airbnb. She'll never check. Thursday, my mother in the kitchen on a call with my Aunt Carol. Dana's finally being reasonable. Honestly, I always thought that house was too much for one person anyway. It should go to family who actually needs it. Friday morning, the day of the welcome home dinner. My phone buzzed one last time. Colin in the hallway, holding my spare key up to his own phone camera, saying to someone off-screen, "Yeah, I've basically already got the whole downstairs mapped out. She's not gonna do anything. She never does." I sat in my truck outside a client's house, watched that clip twice and felt completely calm. I texted Priya, "Tonight." She texted back, "Detective Ruiz will be nearby. Give the signal when you're ready." Friday night, my dining room was full. My mother had invited more people than I expected. My Aunt Carol, my cousin Mateo, even Colin's on-again off-again girlfriend, Bree, who showed up in a dress that still had a boutique tag tucked into the sleeve, paid for, I would later learn, with a stolen credit line. Colin stood at the head of the table, my table, and raised a glass. "To new beginnings," he said, grinning. "And to my sister finally getting over herself." A ripple of uncomfortable laughter. My mother beamed like he'd won an award. Then he reached into his jacket and pulled out, theatrically like he'd been waiting all week to do this, a single brass key. My spare key. He set it down on the table in front of him with a small, deliberate clink. "Officially," he said. "Home." I remember that clink. I want you to remember it too, because it was the same sound my mother's fork had made against her wine glass 3 months earlier, the night this started. A little performance of ownership. A little click that said, "I've already decided this is mine." I stood up. I didn't raise my voice. I never do. My voice came out level, almost gentle, the way I talk to a client I'm about to tell their dream renovation is structurally unsound. "Before we toast," I said, "I want to show everyone something." I set my phone on the table and played 11 seconds of video, Colin holding that exact key up to a camera, saying she's not gonna do anything, she never does. The table went silent. "That's from 3 days ago," I said. "In my hallway. On a camera I installed after I found out someone had a duplicate made of my house key 11 days before Mom asked me if Colin could move in." I looked at my mother. "The locksmith receipt had your name on the card, by the way. Not his." My mother's mouth opened. Nothing came out. I set a second thing on the table, a printed page. "This is the Family Property Access Addendum. It has a forged notary stamp. The real notary retired in 2019 and lives in Charlotte. I called her. She's never met either of you." I set a third page down. "This is a $47,000 business credit line, opened in my company's name with my forged signature, under Colin's operation. 31,000 of it is already spent on that Range Rover in my driveway, and I'd guess," I glanced at Bree's sleeve, "on that dress." Bree went white and sat down without being asked to. Colin's jaw worked. "Dana, that's not what it looks like. There's a legitimate business explanation. We structured it as an operational advance against projected." "Save it," I said, still quiet. "I already have a forensic accountant's report. And a police report filed 2 weeks ago." That's when the doorbell rang. I hadn't touched my phone. I didn't need to. Priya and Detective Ruiz had been parked half a block down since 7, waiting for my text, which I'd sent under the table the second Colin set that key down. My hand had been in my lap the whole time. Nobody saw it. Nobody was supposed to. 2 officers came in at my mother's request. She was the one who, on autopilot, hostess instinct overriding panic, opened the door. Detective Ruiz asked for Colin Whitfield by name. I picked up the brass key off the table, the one he'd set down like a trophy, and I held it up so everyone could see it. Then I snapped it in half against the edge of the table. It didn't actually snap clean. Brass doesn't break like in the movies. But the bend was enough. The gesture was enough. Everyone understood. "You don't get a key to something you tried to steal," I said. The officers walked Colin out in handcuffs 11 minutes later, still talking, still explaining, still using the word equitable, right up until the door closed behind him. Here's what happened in the weeks after, laid out plainly, the way I'd want a news report to lay it out. Colin was charged with identity theft, financial exploitation, and forgery of a public document, all felonies under North Carolina law given the dollar amount involved. He took a plea deal 5 months later. 3 years probation, mandatory restitution of the full $47,000 to my company, and a permanent felony record. His girlfriend Bree left within a week. Turns out the Range Rover was the only thing keeping her around, and the leasing company repossessed it 9 days after his arrest. My mother was never criminally charged. She'd stayed just on the right side of the line. Just complicit. Just the one who kept the secret, made the key, coached the wording. But civil consequences are consequences too. I removed her as the emergency contact and secondary signer on the small joint account I'd kept from my father's estate settlement, worth about $14,000, which had technically been under her management on my behalf, and which, my forensic accountant discovered in the process of digging through everything else, had $6,200 unaccounted for over 18 months. I didn't press charges against my own mother, but I stopped inviting her to Sunday dinner. She hasn't spoken to me since except one voicemail for months later that I still haven't returned. Aunt Carol and Mateo, who had nothing to do with any of it and had simply been sitting at the wrong table on the wrong night, I made a point of calling personally the next morning. Mateo, 24, had been struggling to find steady work after a layoff. I offered him a paid apprenticeship at Whitfield & Co. Real work, real training, a real wage, $19 an hour to start. He's still with me. He's good with his hands and better with clients than I was at his age. I want to be clear about why that mattered to me. This wasn't about punishing everyone who shared blood with my brother. It was about drawing a line between the people who took from me and the people who simply happened to be standing nearby. Mateo got a job offer. Colin got a court date. Those are different things, and I made sure everyone understood the difference. 7 months later, on a night when the rain was coming down sideways off the mountains, my doorbell rang at 9:40 p.m. It was Colin. He looked smaller than I remembered, thinner, his jacket soaked through, no umbrella. A single duffel bag at his feet that looked like everything he owned. Probation had cost him the job he'd scraped together after his release. His new girlfriend, apparently, had thrown him out that afternoon. "Dana," he said, and his voice cracked in a way I recognized because it was the same crack I used to fake months earlier when I was the one performing weakness. "I don't have anywhere else. Please. Just for a couple nights." I stood in the doorway, the warm light of my hallway spilling out onto the porch, my husband Marcus's hand resting lightly on the small of my back behind me. I looked at my brother for a long moment. "You had a key to this house once," I said. "You used it to plan how to take it from me while I sat across the table trusting you. I'm not giving you a second one. Dana, please, it's pouring." "There's a shelter on Tunnel Road," I said, gently, factually, the same voice I'd used the night this all ended. "It's 4 miles from here. I'll call ahead so they know you're coming." Then I closed the door. I stood there a moment, my hand still on the wood, and Marcus wrapped his arms around me from behind and said quietly, "You okay?" "Yeah," I said, and I meant it. "I really am." We turned off the porch light together and went back to the kitchen, where the kettle was still warm. Here's what I learned, and I'll say it plainly because I don't think it needs dressing up. The people who count on you never doubting them are usually the ones who least deserve your trust. Being called the strong one isn't a compliment when it's used as an excuse to take from you. And playing weak, when you know exactly what you're doing, isn't dishonesty. It's strategy. Sometimes the calmest, quietest people in the room are the ones already holding all the evidence. I didn't raise my voice once through any of this. I didn't have to. The truth, laid out in order, is louder than any shout. So let me ask you, if your family stood up at dinner and announced something like that, would you have said something on the spot? Or would you have played it quiet the way I did? If this story hit home, hit like, drop a comment telling me what you would have done differently, and subscribe because this channel is full of stories just like it. And trust me, the next one gets worse before it gets better.